Hello and welcome to our job tour for SQL Generate Unique ID. So this is kind of a fun job right here because it does something really powerful for us, which allows us to generate a unique ID, which we can then use to tag things like orders in an order form system. So there's a 7-step process to getting this up and working with your job right here. The steps are actually quite simple. It's just a lot of copying and pasting. But because I always like to do my best to explain some of the techniques that you see, I do want to go into some detail so that by the time you're done, hopefully you're going to have at least a general understanding of how it works in the background. Okay, so let's just go ahead and get started. So first things first, this is a job that requires a unique database table. Luckily for us, we have the definition for that table right here. You just go ahead and take this code and copy and paste it into the database editor of your choice. Now there is one important detail to this code which I want to draw your attention to, and that is the auto increment value. Now basically what we're going to do here is we're going to create a very simple database table that just has a field for receiving a unique auto-incremented value and a date at when that auto-incremented value was created. However, we can choose what that initial auto-increment value is. Now by default, it's 1, which means that the first time we insert a value into this table, we're going to get a unique ID of 1 back. The next time 2, 3, so on and so forth. But if I change this value to something else, well, this will be the unique ID that I get back first, and then it'll start counting from that value. The reason why I draw attention to this is maybe you're creating a system where you already have an order form system in place, you've been collecting orders for a while, and you don't want to start at 1 because that would be frankly confusing, right? You want to start at whatever your current order number is that you've been, say, creating manually. So this allows us to do it. Now for this job though, I'm going to keep it at 1, but just want to kind of draw your attention to that you can change that value, and then when you run this query, your order number table will be created with that value. Let's go ahead and quickly take a look at this table. Again, as promised, it's very simple. It's just an ID field and a date. Therefore, when I insert a record into this, it's going to get the current timestamp, and in this case, it's going to start with the 1. So how does this actually tie into our job? Well, we want to make sure that whenever we run this job, if we don't have, in this case, what we're going to call order number set, we want to generate a unique one and then just save that so we can use it later in the form. And that's exactly what this query module item does right here. So in order to use this, there's really I'll actually say there's 2 ways you can do this. The first is you can literally just right click on this guy and say create field presets group, and we can say generate unique ID. Generates ID to order table or something like that, and I can save this as a preset, and then I can just select my current job that I'm working with and right click on that job and say add field presets, and then select that generate unique ID. We can do that and you don't have to worry about any of the copy and pasting here. However, I do want to make sure that you understand what each part does, so let me just go ahead and say we won't do that for right now. We'll instead just copy and paste. So assuming that we're going to copy and paste, we will go ahead in our current job, we create a query module, and the first thing we do is we copy and paste our SQL code in there. We then scroll down and check this box right here, return last insert ID. And then finally, we'd scroll all the way to the bottom and we'd copy and paste this code into our code to run after query block. Now, I'm going to draw your attention again to something right here. Notice it says debug right here. We do not want this actually running on a production form. So when we are ready for production, we're just going to go ahead and do that. Now I'm actually going to do that right now just because in most cases we're going to look at our order number in a different way, but this is there just in case you want it. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail as to how this is working here, but the very simple gist is this. When we run this form, we're going to go ahead and insert a record into our order number table that we just created. Then, by checking this, we're going to tell the system behind the scenes that the value that I want to return from this query is the last insert ID value, which again is just going to be this unique number that's incremented every time we insert into this table. Then we're going to assign that unique number to a session variable called order number. And if you've used tokens, in rack forms before, you notice that's why I have these S tokens right here, is because this is just simply going to equal that number that I've just inserted into the database. Finally, to make sure from a logical side that we only generate this number once, I'm going to go ahead and run this code right here in our conditional PHP block, which is to say, very simply, go ahead and only run this query. That is, only run this guy right here if order number doesn't already exist. And this serves a very important function, which I want to demonstrate right now, which is that if we didn't do that, we would essentially get a number that always incremented every time the user ran the form. So in other words, if I do this right now, you'll notice that our current order number is 1. And you can see here that in our database now, we do indeed have 1. But if I refresh this form, I don't want that number to increment, right? That wouldn't make sense if the number incremented because this is not multiple orders here. This is just loading the page. But right now, it's actually doing that. Notice this number is going up. And if I look at my database, I'm getting more records entered into here. And the reason why that's happening is because I kind of did something a little cheesy here. I basically am issuing an unset command right here that basically says go ahead and unset that session variable so that when we hit this form again, that is, we hit this query item, it's going to go ahead and say, well, no, that's actually not set, so go ahead and run this query again. Now, this is very important, and I do this because we don't need this code here, but we actually do need the code in our submission page. I'm actually going to add it right now, just so I don't forget, but we're going to swing back to that in a couple minutes here. So for right now, though, let's go ahead and run this form here and just make sure that now that I've removed that code, it doesn't matter how many times you refresh the form, I'm always going to have this value right here. So you'll notice now that every time I refresh the form, I'm not adding multiple values in, I'm just adding the most recent one. Okay, so now we basically have almost everything that we need to actually run this in a logical setting now. So basically when I go to my submission page, because I already have this unique order number, there's essentially two things I want to do. In this case, I'm actually going to display that order number, right, just so we can see what it is, and for right now it's going to be 5. And then I'm going to use that in an SQL insert statement. In this case, in the FB demos, where I'm going to insert that into the age column. So we should see when I run this form, excuse me, this value 5 entered into the FB demo table's age column. And sure enough, if I look, there is my 5. So this it's a little bit cheesy because it's using the age column here, but I didn't want to create too many unique tables in rack forms. But you can imagine that this would be your order table, right? So you can actually use this in the order table. You can use it in emails, right? All we have to do is just use this token right here, right? So if I had a unique email that I was generating, I could simply say in email plus, I could say the order number was, and just do something like that. Or if I actually wanted to use this in, let's say, a simple email where I actually describe the order number, I could even do something like create a hidden field, and then the hidden field's value is going to be that token, right? So we can do that as well. So I could say order, I'm going to say G order number. And so now if I actually run this form right here, you're going to see that I've incremented this value. Oops, let me go to our order number table. You can see that I have a new record in here. And if we look at our form behind the scenes, we should see that that hidden field, G order number, equals that value as well. And we can kind of use G order number then as something that is going to be added to any of the emails that we create because it's a standard form field. So let me just go ahead and run this from the top again just to show you how all this logic works together. So I'm basically going to run this form. You notice now that I have a 6 in here. And when I submit this, my unique ID was 6. And if I look at my database table in FB demo, a 6 was inserted right here. Now, key to this is that that unique order number is now been used, right? It's being inserted into a table where I'm capturing these order values. And so next time I run the form, I don't want to use 6 again, I want to use 7. And so that's exactly what we're doing here. So how are we actually getting it so that it always increments by 1? Well, if you recall, on this page right here, I copy and pasted this code, which basically says unset this order number variable. So unset this. Do not use this anymore. Unset that variable. And because it's now been unset, this check right here, where we actually say, do we have an order number value set, fails, or I should say it passes because we don't have one set, and then it runs that query, which returns us a unique ID. Now, it is important in closing here to say that this value right here is only valid per browser session. And by the way, this is not some weird caveat or catch. This is just the way web browsers and sessions work. But you'll notice here that the value that I get back from this, actually, I'd already submitted this page. Let me go back one here. This value is going to equal, in this case, one more than this one. And if I were to open a third browser up, it would get the unique ID 9. And again, this is not some weird catch or a fault in how we've generated our code. It simply means that when we have session variables like this, it doesn't cross browsers. It only works for the same browser. So as far as the database is concerned, if the user went ahead and opened up a second browser window right here, they're going to get a new unique ID right here, because as far as the system is concerned, this is a completely different user. And that's good for security. If it didn't do things like this, we could have it where somebody is filling out a bank form, right? Filling in some banking information or logging to a system, and all the other browsers on the system would be getting that secure information. Of course, that would be a horrible thing. So this just simply means that the session is only active for one unique browser that we use, which is in general what we want, but it is important to note here that that is something that's going to happen. So if you're testing and you're using different browsers, you might see that happen, and that is indeed why it happens. Okay, so let's go and talk about our form here in one final conclusion, just kind of a whirlwind tour. So the basic idea is I have a table in my database that we created that's basically every time a form is run is generating a unique ID and a timestamp. The timestamp is not necessary. We're just doing that because we need something to insert into so that we get a unique ID back. The unique ID then is assigned to a session variable called order number. We assign it to the session number because that way it persists across multiple pages, and it's also really easy then to use in rack forms as an S token. So you notice that we're using that in two places here, and we can do things like use that in email plus items, use it in conditional logic, and so on. Now, in order to make sure that we only generate one unique ID per browser session, I've got this little code right here, which basically says in raw PHP, if session order number is not set, that's what this little ampersand is, if it's not set, we're going to go ahead and generate a unique number. Now that our unique number has been generated, when we go to our submission page, we're going to be inserting that unique number into the database. To keep everything clean, though, to make sure that we always get logically one unique number per form session, that is submission, we're going to unset that variable every time we hit our submission page. That way, we've only generated one unique number, and if the user decides to fill out the form again, they place a second order, they add a new team member, they do whatever your form does, they're always going to get a unique ID, again, per that browser session. Okay, so that's basically it. I realize this is a slightly longer video, but again, I wanted to be as clear as I could about the actual technology that's powering this logic in the back end. It's actually really, really handy to know this type of stuff. So I shall leave it at that. Any questions, as always, please let us know at info@rackforms.com.